Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're opening up a file on a case that is really, I think, quite seminal in the history of UK forensic policing.
Absolutely. A landmark case.
We're talking about the 1995 murder of 15-year-old Naomi Smith. It's a heartbreaking tragedy, obviously, but it also coincided almost perfectly with, well, the birth of the National DNA Database.
That timing is just crucial, isn't it?
It really is. So our sources today, they let us do a real deep forensic exploration of the investigation itself, the revolutionary science they used, and maybe the chilling final chapter of the killer's freedom, or, well, lack thereof recently.
Yeah, it's a case defined by this stark contrast, isn't it? You have the immediate, very localized, just unspeakable violence of the crime itself, and then you contrast that with the sort of detached, high-tech certainty of the science that ultimately solved it. If you're interested in how modern policing really evolved in the 90s, this is kind of the blueprint.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We have to start by setting the scene. Nuneaton, Warwickshire, September 1995. Naomi Louise Smith was, well, by all accounts, a pretty normal 15-year-old student, born March 1980.
Yeah, described by her family as maybe a little shy, perhaps lacking a bit of confidence compared to some of her peers.
Right, but active in local groups, enjoyed gymnastics, and importantly for this story, a marching band.
And the day we really need to focus on is Thursday, September 14th, 1995. It was a school night. She'd spent the evening with her best friend, Emma Jones, practicing with the marching band.
Okay.
They were dropped off afterwards. Everything seemed totally routine, just mundane, really, until that specific moment around 9:45 p.m.
9:45 p.m., Naomi leaves her home on the Brett's Hall estate. And her task was simple, very domestic, actually. She just needed to post a catalog letter for her mother, Catherine Smith.
Right, and the postbox wasn't far at all, maybe 200 yards away, on the main road that cuts through the Annesley Common area.
Just a short walk.
A very short walk. And this is where the detailed reconstruction, the timeline, becomes absolutely critical. Investigators knew exactly what she was wearing, which, turned out to be vital for witnesses trying to recall details later, especially in the dark.
What was she wearing?
She had jeans on, a dark blue polo neck shirt, and an old, kind of bulky white Aran-style jumper. But the item everyone seemed to remember was her jacket.
The jacket, right?
Yeah, a bomber-style jacket. It had Chicago Fire Department on the front, but really visibly across the back it said Backdraft.
Ah, like the movie.
Exactly. It was a distinctive piece of clothing, quite modern for the time. It stood out.
So a task that really should have taken, 3 minutes, 5 minutes tops.
Yeah, eerily.
It stretched into half an hour, then an hour. By 11:15 p.m., she still hadn't come back.
And her father, Brian Smith, who was a taxi driver, he started to get frantic, naturally.
Of course.
He immediately started driving around the neighborhood, picked up Emma Jones, Naomi's best friend, to help him search.
Just desperate search.
Utterly desperate. And their search ended with just the most devastating discovery possible just before midnight.
Where?
The local recreation ground. It was only a few hundred meters from the family home. Her father found her body concealed underneath the children's slide in the playground structure.
Oh, underneath the slide. The horror of that discovery. And then the initial postmortem findings just amplified it, didn't they?
Immediately. This was instantly classified as a crime of extreme savagery. It wasn't, just a street attack gone wrong. She had been sexually assaulted. The cause of death was hemorrhage due to the complete severance of the carotid vessels. Her throat had been cut.
And there was more, wasn't there? Something particularly brutal.
Yes. The findings also detailed that her genitals had been mutilated with a knife. Post-mortem.
That specific detail, the post-mortem mutilation, that must have sent up immediate red flags for the investigators.
Instantly. That finding, the specific sadistic nature of the attack, it was recognized straight away as signaling a highly dangerous individual, someone likely harboring deep psychological issues, pathologies.
Right.
It drove that immediate all-hands-on-deck police mobilization. They knew they weren't just looking for a common criminal. They were hunting a predator.
Which sets the stage for the huge effort that followed.
Let's look at that initial phase of the police response. The gravity of it meant Warwickshire police threw substantial resources at it right away.
Yeah. Detective Superintendent Tony Bayliss headed the inquiry. They set up an incident room at Bedworth Police Station. And the scale was, well, impressive for the time. Up to 50 officers were immediately assigned just to canvass the whole area.
50 officers, wow.
Door-to-door inquiries, meticulously collecting witness statements, it just reflected the urgency. They needed to catch someone they considered an extreme risk to the public and fast.
But the initial search, the ground search itself, faced problems. It did. About 30 officers were involved initially, but they ran into logistical hurdles. The weather was poor right afterwards, which really complicated searching the ground.
Muddy, difficult conditions.
Exactly. And crucially, they couldn't find the murder weapon, the knife.
Still missing. That must have been a major block early on.
A huge puzzle. Was it just, discarded somewhere nearby? An opportunistic weapon? Or was the killer careful enough to take it away without being seen?
Either way, no knife meant no obvious fingerprints, no fibers maybe.
Precisely. They lack that traditional forensic link to a suspect right out of the gate. And D.S. Bayless, he recognized that the conventional methods might just fail here. That meant they needed a really high-visibility, community-focused appeal.
And they really leaned into the media, didn't they? That was quite strategic.
Very strategic. They engaged the public straight away. They even gave news cameras access to the incident room.
Really? Inside the investigation?
Yeah, to show the sheer scale of the operation. The aim was to put pressure on the local community, make them understand how seriously this was being taken.
And what were the initial appeals focusing on?
They needed to exploit every single potential sighting. So early appeals focused really intensely on details that might break the case open, like the fact that 3 or 4 youths had apparently been seen acting suspiciously opposite the Smith home between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. that night.
Okay, that's specific.
And they quickly announced a reward, too. £10,000 for information leading to a conviction, hoping money might overcome, any local loyalties or fear.
But then came this really unusual, quite shocking decision, didn't it, on September 17th, just days after the discovery?
Yes, this was ethically very challenging, but maybe strategically brilliant in hindsight. The police, and crucially, they had the agonized permission of Naomi's parents.
Oh, the parents agreed to this.
They did. They made the extraordinary decision to publicly disclose the full, gruesome extent of Naomi's injuries.
Wow, that's a huge call. Why did they do that? Normally they hold details back, right?
Exactly. Normally you keep forensic details private to test a suspect's confession later. By revealing them, they sacrificed that advantage. It was a desperate but calculated gamble. They hoped it would give them a psychological edge.
How so?
D.S. Bayless was quoted directly about it. He said, "I believe that it is right and proper to reveal the extent of Naomi's injuries, so that those who may have mixed loyalties about whether to come forward with information do so."
So they were trying to shock the conscience of anyone protecting the killer, to force their hand.
Precisely. And in doing that, they revealed 2 highly specific details. First, the lower body mutilation, which established the sheer savagery. But the second piece, that was the one that truly defined the case.
Which was?
A bite mark found on her left breast.
Bite mark. And presumably.
And the critical addition to that detail was the immediate confirmation that saliva had been left at the scene.
Saliva. So DNA.
Right there. They had secured a sample. By revealing the bite mark, they were essentially sending a message directly to the killer. We know you did this, and we have your biological signature. They were using forensic science as a psychological weapon, even before they had a suspect or a match, trying to force his hand or pressure anyone close to him.
Incredible strategy. But before that science could really deliver, they still had to rely on witness accounts, didn't they? And those sound like they were quite confusing initially.
Very confusing. A patchwork, really. The timeline of Naomi's last minutes is fragmented.
What did the first account suggest?
Well, contradictory things, basically. You had a motorist who claimed they saw Naomi standing near the postbox, which suggests she wasn't rushing straight home. Maybe she was waiting for someone.
Okay, so maybe not a random ambush.
That's what it implied initially. Maybe a planned or anticipated meeting.
Then there was another witness, a young girl.
Yes, a young girl who lived opposite the postbox. And her testimony was crucial. She described seeing Naomi post the letter, walk past the postbox, then pause and turn back.
Turn back. Towards where?
She then paused again, right at the entrance to a local footpath, known locally as the Jitty.
A jitty like an alleyway or footpath.
Exactly. And then the witness saw her walk down it, towards the recreation ground.
And friends found that unusual.
Highly unusual, especially after dark. Apparently, while the Jitty was a potential shortcut, people generally avoided it at night. And Naomi, being described as quite shy.
It suggests she wasn't afraid at that moment, or she knew who she was meeting.
It strongly suggests one of 2 things. Either she recognized someone waiting for her at the entrance to the alleyway, or she was perhaps coerced by someone she trusted enough not to immediately run from. It really started to narrow the suspect pool away from a random stranger, pointing more towards someone local or someone who specifically targeted her.
Okay, that makes sense. But there was another sighting too, wasn't there? The one that maybe sent the police down the wrong path initially.
Yes, the cyclist. Later that night, a cyclist reported seeing a man running out of the jitty and gave quite a detailed description.
What was the description?
Aged 20 to 25, athletic build, and importantly, short, bleached, spiky blonde hair.
Bleached blonde hair. That's very specific.
Very. And that description became the focus of the early manhunt. But, Diaz-Bayless and his team were experienced. They knew eyewitness descriptions, particularly late at night under stress.
Can be unreliable.
Notoriously unreliable. Maybe the killer did look like that. Or maybe it was just some unrelated guy running for a bus who happened to have bleached hair. That inherent uncertainty is precisely what forced the investigation to pivot so quickly, away from fallible human memory towards irrefutable biological evidence.
And that transition takes us right into the heart of this case, doesn't it? When the conventional policing stalled, they went high-tech. Part 2, the breakthrough in forensics, the DNA profile.
Exactly. But even before that big forensic breakthrough, the police did conduct the necessary, dragnet operation. On September 21st, 1995, just a week after the murder, there was a major mobilization.
What happened?
Coordinated early morning raids on over 20 addresses. It resulted in the arrest of 5 local men on suspicion of murder.
5 men arrested. Did that lead anywhere?
No. All 5 were eventually released without charge, and other suspects later on were also eliminated. It just highlights how difficult that initial phase was.
Yeah.
The killer was probably local, fit the general profile maybe, but wasn't necessarily known to the police or wasn't involved in the kind of low-level crime that usually gets people into the system. Traditional methods just weren't connecting the dots.
So they had immense pressure, public pressure, political pressure, social urgency, and a killer who seemed invisible to standard policing.
Right.
The moment everything changed came about a month after the murder, in October 1995. Diaz-Bayless announced they had done it. They'd successfully obtained a full DNA profile of the killer.
And this was secured from that absolutely critical saliva sample left at the scene, the one that crime scene manager Paul Taberner had meticulously preserved.
You have to put this in historical context, though. 1995. Getting a full profile from a small saliva sample. That was still a big deal technically, wasn't it?
A significant technical feat, yes.
Yeah.
Possible, but not routine like today.
And we really need to emphasize the historical significance here. People often think of DNA-solving crimes in the UK, and they immediately jump to, say, Colin Pitchfork in Leicestershire.
Which was nearly a decade earlier, yes.
So what made the Naomi Smith case such a procedural landmark, even if Pitchfork was technically the very first DNA conviction?
The procedural difference is huge. It really centers on 2 things: mass screening and the national database.
Okay.
The Pitchfork case used DNA profiling the older RFLP technology, which needed quite large samples, but the screening was targeted based on blood group after thousands volunteered samples. It was a localized investigation that used DNA to confirm identity after a massive public appeal and, a bit of luck with an overheard conversation.
Right. So how was Smith different?
The Smith case was about using newer DNA tech to proactively find a completely unknown suspect through mass sampling and, crucially, comparing the crime scene profile against a brand new, centralized national asset.
So our sources confirm this was the very first time the newly established Forensic Science Service, the FSS, carried out a mass DNA screening, specifically designed to catch a suspect who wasn't already known or registered.
Absolutely. The FSS had only just launched the world's first national DNA database in April 1995.
Just 5 months before the murder.
Exactly. So this case wasn't just a test of the lab technology, it was the first major acid test of the operational capability of the UK's huge investment in centralized DNA policing. They had this profile from the scene, but no match on the database yet. The clock was ticking.
So no match on the database. They had to generate suspects to test against the profile. How did they narrow it down?
They turned to forensic psychology. They brought in Paul Britton, who was very well known at the time for his offender profiling work.
Right, the jigsaw man himself.
That's him. He used the details of the crime, the savagery, the sadism, the proximity to Naomi's home, the specific targeting to generate a profile of the likely offender.
And what did that profile suggest? Who should they target?
That profile targeted roughly 800 local men, aged between 15 and 28, for voluntary mass DNA screening.
800 men. That's a huge number for a local community.
It is. The psychological profile provided the geographical and age boundaries, which helped avoid testing absolutely everyone, but still, 800 is a massive undertaking for a voluntary screening.
How do they manage that? Ethically? Practically? Convincing 800 men to give DNA samples. That sounds like an exercise in social pressure.
It was. The police relied on overwhelming visibility and implied certainty. They made it crystal clear. The profile was unique, the killer was local, and science would find him.
So did they actually get 800 samples?
Our sources indicate that while 800 were targeted, the actual number of samples taken was closer to 135.
Much smaller. Why the difference?
It suggests a few things. Maybe some moved away, some were ruled out by other means. But it likely means the killer was among that group of 135 who felt obligated to comply, or perhaps was arrogant enough to think they could beat the system, or that the odds were somehow in their favor.
Believing they wouldn't be the one identified.
Perhaps, or just feeling the pressure was too great not to comply.
And that screening process, comparing 135 samples against the crime scene profile, that must have been incredibly meticulous work back then.
Immense, detailed work. The forensic analysis itself was handled by Hazel Johnson and her dedicated team up in Weatherby. They were tasked with comparing each one of those 135 individual profiles against that single, unique sample from Naomi's body.
The pressure on that lab team must have been immense.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the weight of expectation in late 1995. They weren't just running routine tests. They were essentially validating the entire concept and future of the National DNA Database.
And it wasn't instant like on TV, right?
No way. In 95, DNA analysis, even using the newer STR technology short tandem repeats, which needed smaller samples than the old RFLP, still took days, maybe even weeks per sample, to process and compare fully. It was a methodical, grinding process.
But they knew the killer was in that batch somewhere.
They knew. Failure wasn't really an option given the savagery of the crime and the intense public and media focus.
And meanwhile, the killer, knowing the police had his DNA, knowing the screening was happening, the psychological pressure must have been unbearable.
You'd think so. He knew his biological signature was unique, he knew they had it, and he was likely compelled, one way or another, to participate in the very process designed to expose him.
It really was a perfect storm, wasn't it? Cutting-edge science meets clever investigative strategy.
A net cast just wide enough to guarantee capture without totally alienating the entire community, and that relentless, methodical science, it eventually delivered the absolute certainty they needed.
Which brings us neatly to part 3, identifying Edwin Hopkins. This is where the profile finally got a name.
It did. It was 2 months after the murder, November 1995. On November 16th, following the successful DNA match from the screening, 4 additional arrests were made.
And one of those was?
Edwin Hopkins. He was 19 years old, unemployed, and lived significantly very near the recreation ground where Naomi's body had been discovered.
Right in the vicinity.
2 days later, on November 18th, he was formally charged with Naomi's murder.
The community reaction. It must have been sheer shock. He was a local lad living right there among them the whole time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Participating in the same fear, the same public appeals. When Hopkins appeared at Nuneaton Magistrates Court on November 20th, just confirming his name, address, date of birth, the reality must have sunk in.
And the police were sure.
The investigation, which had cast such a wide net initially, had now definitively narrowed to this one individual. Our sources make a point of noting that the 8 other main suspects identified throughout the entire inquiry were subsequently and definitively eliminated.
Reinforcing the DNA result.
Absolutely. This wasn't guesswork anymore. It was a biological pinpoint.
While the police were building that final case against Hopkins, the community was still grieving and trying to process it all. There were memorials.
Yes. We should briefly mention the immediate public mourning. A memorial event was held at the recreation ground quite soon after the discovery, a grim recognition of how that children's play area had been transformed into a horrific crime scene.
And the funeral itself.
That was held on December 18th, 1995 at Chapel End Methodist Church. The descriptions paint a picture of just pure tragic loss. The detail about the white coffin, decorated with flowers spelling out Naomi's name, it just emphasizes the stolen innocence.
A heartbreaking image.
It was the moment the community could grieve collectively, knowing the predator had been identified, but obviously before justice had been formally served in court.
So the investigation now shifted completely into the judicial phase. But the strength of that science must have meant the defense faced an almost impossible task. Let's get into part 4, the trial of Edwin Hopkins, the evidence pile.
Right. The trial didn't actually start until January 22nd, 1997, at Birmingham Crown Court. That delay reflects the time needed for both sides to prepare and fully understand the highly technical forensic evidence.
The prosecution was building its case on
Two distinct, incredibly powerful scientific pillars, and the defense knew they had to somehow undermine both to have any chance.
Hopkins himself, represented by Mr. James Hunt, QC, he maintained his innocence.
Throughout. He relied on an alibi, hoping it would create enough reasonable doubt for the jury.
What was the alibi?
It was simple on the surface. He claimed he was at his sister Julie's house that evening, playing Trivial Pursuit.
Okay. Did he deny being near the scene?
No, crucially, he admitted he had cycled to the off-license, which was near the postbox Naomi used, around 9:30 p.m. He said he went to buy beer and crisps.
So he placed himself right there, right around the time of the murder.
Exactly. In the exact proximity of the victim, just before she was attacked. But he claimed he saw nothing suspicious and just completed his errand and went back to his sister's.
The defense must have been arguing it was just terrible coincidence, maybe some kind of accidental DNA transfer, though that sounds like a stretch.
A very difficult sell, given the nature of the evidence, particularly the bite mark. But the most spectacular collapse of his defense didn't actually come from the prosecution lawyers tearing him apart. It came from his own family.
His sister, Julie Hopkins.
Yes, she became a key witness for the prosecution. Initially, she seems to have corroborated his alibi, probably out of family loyalty.
Of course.
But later, likely confronted with the overwhelming scientific evidence the police had gathered, she changed her story and revealed critical inconsistencies that directly implicated her brother.
What were the inconsistencies? What broke the alibi?
Two main things. Firstly, she testified that the seemingly quick bike trip to the off-license, which should have taken minutes, had actually taken him a full 45 minutes to complete.
45 minutes. That's a huge gap.
A huge, unexplained gap that perfectly encompassed the timeline of Naomi leaving her home, going to the post box, the jitty, and being attacked.
And the second thing?
Perhaps even more damning, when he finally returned to her house after those 45 minutes, he had changed into different clothes.
Changed his clothes. That's a classic sign, isn't it? Getting rid of potential evidence.
A killer's first instinct often is to discard or change clothes that might be contaminated with blood, fibers, any forensic trace.
Did he have an explanation for the 45-minute delay?
His explanation sounded incredibly flimsy. He claimed he'd tried to buy milk somewhere else first, and then, supposedly, he was stopped by the police for riding his bicycle without lights.
Does that hold water?
It attempted to account for the time delay, but it completely failed to explain why he would need to change his clothes. And it still placed him out and about during that critical 45-minute window.
But Julie Hopkins' testimony went further than just breaking the alibi, didn't it? It also gave some context about him.
It did. It provided the court with a kind of psychological backdrop. It didn't prove motive directly, but suggested maybe capability or at least a predisposition towards the kind of extreme violence seen at the crime scene.
How so?
She provided evidence about her brother's apparent obsession with knives. Said he collected large hunting knives.
And the murder involved a knife, including the mutilation.
Exactly. While the actual murder weapon was never found, the fact that the crime involved horrific knife injuries made this detail about his collection a chilling piece of background information. It aligned the man in the dock with the psychological profile the experts had built.
So the sister's testimony was devastating. But ultimately, even without that, the conviction really rested on the science, right? The twin pillars of forensics.
Absolutely. The prosecution, led by Mr. Coleman Trucy, QC, presented evidence that was, certainly by 1997 standards, irrefutable.
Pillar 1, the DNA.
A DNA match. The profile extracted from that crucial saliva sample on Naomi's body matched Edwin Hopkins' sample, the one he'd supplied during the mass screening.
And the strength of that match.
The statistical weight was declared in court as being 36 million to 1.
36 million to 1.
It's a crucial number. In the mid-90s, the standards for statistical certainty in DNA were already high, but presenting a figure like 36 million to 1 to a jury, it basically meant the probability of it being anyone else on Earth was effectively zero.
This was the payoff for the whole database strategy.
The absolute validation of it. It placed Hopkins, biologically, right there at the moment of the assault.
So DNA was the anchor. What was the second pillar? You called it the lock.
The odontological match, the bite mark. Forensic odontologist Andrew Walker presented his comparison between plaster casts made of Hopkins' teeth and the physical bite mark left on Naomi's breast.
And this wasn't just a general match.
No, this was about specific identification based on unique characteristics of Hopkins' teeth.
What was unique about his teeth?
Hopkins had a very distinctive dental profile. Apparently, he'd lost a front tooth in a cycling accident some years before.
Okay.
And crucially, the remaining teeth hadn't stayed put. They had shifted naturally over time to try and close the gap left by the missing tooth.
So not a perfect row of teeth.
Not at all. This shifting didn't create a nice, uniform arch. It created an unusual, highly individualized pattern of misalignment, specific pressure points, unique shapes.
So when the killer bit Naomi, that unique pattern was impressed onto her skin.
Like a fingerprint made of teeth. Andrew Walker testified that when he compared the cast of Hopkins' teeth to the bruise pattern and indentations of the bite mark, the conclusion was unequivocal. The cast matched the bite mark exactly.
Exact match. That's incredibly powerful evidence.
It really is, because while DNA theoretically can sometimes face questions about secondary transfer or contamination, though unlikely here,
Right.
a unique dental impression confirmed by a highly individualized physical feature like that tooth shift serves as a direct physical link. It's like he signed his name on the victim.
So when you combine a 36 million to 1 DNA profile with an exact, unique dental match.
The case became essentially impenetrable. The defense had no credible way to challenge both independent lines of scientific proof simultaneously. Coincidence was just off the table.
It really proved that the whole investigative strategy, the mass screening gamble, the public reveal of the bite mark was completely justified by the forensic certainty it produced.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move to the conclusion of the trial and the aftermath. Part 5, verdict, sentencing, and the recent developments.
Right. Faced with that mountain of scientific certainty, the jury didn't need long. It was an 11-person jury, and they deliberated for just 3 3/4 hours.
Pretty quick for a murder trial.
Very quick. They returned a majority verdict 10-1, finding Edwin Hopkins guilty of murder on January 30th, 1997. He was immediately sentenced to life imprisonment.
And the judge, Mr. Justice Tucker, he used some very strong language at sentencing, didn't he?
He did. It's notable. He described the act as a savage murder, a sadistic murder, and he specifically called Hopkins a very dangerous young man. Those words would echo down the years, especially considering recent events.
What was the judge's recommendation for his minimum time inside? The tariff.
The judge's immediate recommendation was for a minimum tariff of 20 years. That would have meant Hopkins wouldn't even be considered for release until around November 2015, when he'd be 39.
20 years minimum. That reflects the savagery the judge mentioned. It's higher than some life sentences at the time, wasn't it?
It was a significant minimum term, yes, but tariffs back then were subject to review by the Home Secretary. It was standard practice.
Right, political oversight. So what happened with the review?
It was initially reviewed by Michael Howard, the Home Secretary at the time, but later formally set by his successor, Jack Straw. Straw eventually set the minimum term at 18 years.
So reduced from 20 to 18 years.
Yes, a slight reduction. This meant Hopkins became eligible to be considered for parole by November 2013 when he was 37.
Was there any controversy about that reduction, given how the judge described the crime and the offender?
Our sources suggest that while the public was massively relieved by the conviction, there was certainly ongoing debate in the late 90s about sentencing for these kinds of horrific, sadistic murders. Hopkins himself never stopped claiming he was innocent.
He appealed.
He tried several appeals, yes, including one in 2010 specifically trying to get that 18-year minimum term reduced further. But Mr. Justice King reviewed the case then and upheld the 18-year tariff. It was confirmed.
Okay. But there was a moment, wasn't there, around 2004 that briefly cast some doubt, or at least raised questions in the media.
That's right. It happened when another local man, Andrew Dexter, was convicted of a completely separate, horrific murder that also involved torture.
Okay. And the connection.
It was revealed that Dexter had actually been questioned by police during the original Naomi Smith investigation way back in 1995 and then released without charge.
Ah, I see. So for the family, for the public, that must have been deeply unsettling. Could they possibly have had the wrong man all along?
It was definitely unsettling, a real ripple of what if. But the police stood absolutely firm. They immediately confirmed the Smith case would not be reopened.
Why were they so certain?
Their certainty rested entirely on the science. The DNA profile, 36 million to 1, the exact odontological match. They argued that this forensic evidence was definitive and specific to Hopkins. Even if Dexter was also a dangerous individual who happened to be questioned early on, the science proved, beyond any doubt, that Hopkins was Naomi's killer.
That ability to rely on irrefutable evidence stopped the case from potentially unraveling into speculation.
Precisely. It held firm.
And that strength of evidence defined his incarceration for nearly 3 decades. But the final twist, the one that brings this 1995 case right into the present day, came with his eventual release.
Yes. After serving his 18-year minimum term and then spending several more years presumably trying to satisfy the parole board he was safe to release, Hopkins was moved to an open prison in 2021.
A step towards release.
Exactly. Then, in December 2023, he was granted parole. Edwin Hopkins was released from prison.
After nearly 27 years inside. This is where that tension between the scientific certainty of his guilt back then and the risk assessment needed for release now becomes really sharp, doesn't it?
Razor sharp. And the critical detail here is the sheer speed of his failure on release. Just 23 days.
23 days.
Just 23 days after walking free in January 2024, Edwin Hopkins was recalled back to prison.
Why? What happened?
He broke one of the strict conditions attached to his release license. The specific condition hasn't been widely publicized, but a recall that happens that quickly within 3 weeks indicates an immediate, serious breach of trust. Or maybe suggests he couldn't cope with the rules.
It raises huge questions about the risk assessment that allowed his release just weeks earlier.
Absolutely. 23 days of freedom after committing such a savage murder. The timing is shocking. It really underscores the trial judge's original assessment back in 1997. A very dangerous young man.
It feels like a fundamental challenge to the parole system, doesn't it? If the judge saw that enduring danger decades ago, and the system releases him, only for him to breach conditions almost immediately.
It suggests that for certain types of offenders, particularly those involved in sadistic pathological violence, assessing future risk and ensuring effective rehabilitation and monitoring remains incredibly difficult, maybe, for some, impossible to guarantee.
Let's transition now to the final insights. The long-term impact of this case, how it's been remembered, particularly in media and maybe even in investigation training.
Well, the Naomi Smith murder wasn't just a local tragedy that faded away. It became a national reference point for the future of criminal investigation in the UK. It was widely reported at the time, of course, but its procedural significance has given it remarkable longevity in documentary coverage.
It effectively became a kind of case study, didn't it, for integrating hard science with psychological profiling.
Precisely. Paul Britton, the forensic psychologist who helped narrow down that initial suspect pool for the DNA screening, he dedicated a detailed chapter to the case in his 1998 book, The Jigsaw Man.
I remember that book.
It really showcased how advanced psychological profiling wasn't just being used to describe a suspect after the fact, but to actively guide a brand new technological tool, that mass DNA screen, to find him.
And it kept appearing in TV series over the years.
Frequently. It was central to the BBC's Catching the Killers series back in 2001. ITV Central did To Catch a Killer in 2004. These documentaries really focused on the mechanics of the police operation, the breakthroughs.
And it went international, too.
Yeah, its reach extended. The case was featured in a Canadian series called Cold Blood, which later got repackaged as True CSI for the UK audience. Those productions were valuable because they often featured interviews with the key players.
Like who?
People like Naomi's father, Brian Smith, giving that incredibly personal perspective, and the lead investigator, DS Tony Bayliss, offering an authoritative first-hand account of the investigation and those procedural firsts.
Even recently, it's been covered.
As recently as 2019, yeah. It was examined in the Crime Plus Investigation channel series Murder Town. It just shows the indelible mark this event left, not just forensically, but on the Nuneaton community itself.
The continuing coverage really emphasizes just how crucial those investigative methods were, doesn't it? That combination, the unprecedented mass DNA screening, launched just months after the national database went live, coupled with the definitive work of the forensic odontologist.
It provided a template.
It really did. They turned 2 tiny, almost microscopic pieces of biological evidence, saliva from a bite mark, and the impression of teeth into an undeniable, unavoidable truth.
It's a profound statement about the power of forensic technology, just as it was really hitting the mainstream in policing. Think about it. In 1995, creating the National DNA Database was controversial. People questioned the scale, the cost, the ethics. The Smith case immediately and emphatically proved the value of that investment.
How so?
It demonstrated its utility in proactive policing, not just confirming a suspect you already have, but actively catching offenders who weren't already known, who weren't in the system. It showed that if a killer was local, fit the profile, and crucially provided a sample, they would be caught. regardless of how clever or careful they thought they'd been.
So we have this case that stands as this towering success story for forensic science in the UK. It helped define the future of policing by delivering certainty of conviction. But if we connect that original certainty back in '97 with the final event, that recall in 2024, what does this whole arc tell us about the long-term definition of justice when dealing with such extreme violence?
Well, what's fascinating and deeply troubling is that conflict between the technological certainty of guilt and the inherent uncertainty of human risk assessment decades later. 30 years ago, the science was unequivocal. Edwin Hopkins was the killer. That certainty allowed the state to identify him, convict him, and detain him for the protection of society. The swiftness of his recall, 23 days, highlights, arguably, a systemic difficulty, maybe even a failure, in the subsequent process of monitoring and managing that risk long term. The judge in 1997 explicitly called him a very dangerous young man. The state's obligation isn't just to catch the killer initially, it's arguably to perpetually monitor the threat they pose, especially when the initial crime was so calculated and sadistic.
It raises a really powerful, lingering question, doesn't it, about the capacity for certain high-risk offenders to ever truly safely integrate back into society, regardless of how long a minimum term they serve. If the science proved beyond any doubt that someone committed a savage, sadistic murder like this, what level of long-term accountability or monitoring is actually necessary to genuinely guarantee public protection?
Indeed. The case of Naomi Smith absolutely confirmed the immense power of scientific proof to deliver justice in the courtroom. It solves the who. But Edwin Hopkins's immediate return to custody maybe shows us the incredibly complex, possibly perpetual challenge of managing the what next for high-risk offenders whose capacity for extreme violence was proven by irrefutable evidence decades ago. It leaves us, and you listening, to consider: is there a point at which the nature of the crime and the certainty of the forensic proof dictates a permanent, higher standard of societal vigilance and monitoring for public safety, even long after time has been served?